I must have forgot my my wallet. If I was the samurai. Oh yes, we're going to be taking a look at a redo on for Anime Retrospect, which is something about samurais. Oh no, not the. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Let's have some dignity. Come on. Something with samurais that I need to come up with to revisit. But what could it be? A samurai anime. Will it be from the 90s? Oh! Which one? What is this? Oh, that one. That one, huh? Yep. You know what I'm gonna talk about. That's right. Here we go, because today, a redo on Rurouni Kenshin, also known as Samurai X. Today on Anime Retrospect. Here we are with revisiting anime from the 90s, huh? You know, the late 90s and the early 2000s anime. You know, those kind of ones I like to pick as well. Something good for change as well. Especially that has something to do with some samurai on it as well, huh? Well, why am I bringing this up? Because we're going to be revisiting an anime that I always haven't been thought of, that I haven't talked about until now. Rurouni Kenshin, an anime series that I genuinely love, because despite how I'm going to look forward to revisit, that's why. Rurouni Kenshin started as a anime series on January 10th, 1996 as well. This anime is also based on the manga of the same name by Nobuhiro Watsuki as well. This basically how it lasted about only 28 volumes. So let's talk about it. So the story Rurouni Kenshin is how it takes place where it's in the setting of the Meiji Restoration period, which is the end of the samurai era, which is basically how the story, which is in the previous war. So this basically follows a swordsman named Kenshin Humura, who was a former assassin from the previous war, whose bloodstained hands have got brought the terror to the era haunted by his past, when Kenshin wanted to become a wanderer through the streets of Japan after he kills the victims with his reverse blade sword. He basically decided that he becomes a wanderer after he retired from being a manslayer, when he's basically known as Hitokiri Batosai as well. Yeah, that's how his decision has got to him. So he has kept the reverse blade sword called the Sakamoto as well. Along the way, especially with his deadly skills, when he creates a non-lethal method of the peacekeeping, of how he can protect the peace when he's been wanting to protect the innocent from evil, especially when he has his reverse blade sword, especially in this particular, how the story, how it goes. So we also have, because we all know the story was about here as well. The story was pretty good, as how it's slow paced. It's only around about 3 seasons with some. The first season is almost a little beginner type of way, almost serious, but the second season is more serious with those types of tensions as well, including Kaoru, which is the kind-hearted teacher of the Kamiya Kashin Ryu School of Swordsmanship. And here's Sanosuke Sagara, who is the loudmouth, loose cannon character, who is a fighter for hire, and he's also Kenshin Himura's partner. And of course, you have Yahiko, the young son of the samurai who got caught up in a life in the crime in order to survive every types of conflicts. The first season of the series has ranging with those types of comical antics, especially for Kaoru training a sumo wrestler. It's comical types of moment, to the more darker and more serious nature of how Kenshin struggles, to how he remains non-lethal, remains from his past whereabouts, and threatened the life of Kaoru when he wants to save Kaoru from Jinei, especially the sword duel, especially in this anime as well, from what I understand. For the most part, the first season has some minor conflicts, never impacted on the story as if it's intended, giving any appreciated characterization of Kenshin and his newfound companions. When there's conflicts happen in the first season, which has a great impact on a series by introducing the lasting antagonist, which followed to the second season, which brings you to Yoshinamori, who is the ninja leader, who is part of the Aoshi Shinomori, who is basically the leader of the Oni Waban group, which are a group of ninjas as well, because he wanted to have a conflict battle between Kenshin Himura in the library, besides how this goes. Every fight's how it happens in Season 1 has any mixed feelings. With these types of fights of how Kenshin required to use any types of strategy when he analyzed his opponent's techniques so he can overpower them with his fights. He uses one-shot special move with his Sakamoto sword, the Hitsumitsurugi style Ryusui Sen, just to defeat his opponents, of how powerful and strong it could be. Which, that'll give him a lot of credit on this part. Any battle shown in the series, for a shonen anime series from the mid-90s to the early 2000s, very realistic of how this series is well appreciated in its own lifetime, of how the levels of strategies, of how if there's any more superhuman abilities, because of how the show is basically exaggerated with those human-like abilities, of how they can swing their weapon at a speed of lightning on sound, even faster pacing. If it's intended, if there's any other characters, they're using like magical abilities always find a way to tie in the reality of how it explains certain ways of how the examples of any character can breathe fire, especially Hyotoko, who is one of the Oni Waban group as well. Especially in the first season, especially when he has a bag of gasoline in his stomach with a tube that goes on his throat by compressing a diagraphic of breathing fire with clicking a flint with his teeth, so he breathes fire. So that's how it creates any necessity for every characters for their strategies of how there's these special gimmicks in order to win when they enduring these types of strange attacks not very too long enough with its larger attack of their own, as how it's got the credibility of how this goes on in Rurouni Kenshin in the process. This is one of these shows have its popularity more due to so for the request from Nobuhiro Watsuki had a lot to do for of how this can be a lot more episodic in every episode, sensing of how there's some conflicts which how it impacted the overall plot. These types of changes dramatically improve the quality of the story, how this series goes for this, how it's intended. The second season is more serious and more darker than the first season, and because it's revolving minor conflicts, which revolves around the conflict, where it spans the entirety of the, which is legend. Well, the first season is Wandering Samurai arc. Legends of Kyoto is the arc for the second season. How it subdued the way of how it's another swordsman named Makoto Shishio has taken his place after Kenshin Himura retired from being a manslayer. Yeah, we also got newer characters such as Hajime Saito, who's a former leader of the Shinsengumi clan, as how he's been introduced. And also, you have Kenshin Himura's swordmaster, Seijiro Hiko, introduced in the second season. I must say, this easily how Shishio has exploited of how him and his minions were trying to take over Kyoto and its dangerous zone in its own little war pathways of how this goes is how the conflict goes, especially in the second season of Rurouni Kenshin. Must say basically how the rivals of Kenshin Himura has, which are bloodthirsty, where Makoto Shishio is the main antagonist, where he has a sawtooth sword covered in many human oils from every counts of murders, capable of how it's being after he was being set on fire, but he came back alive when he was wrapped up in like he's a mummy as well, which this could happen in the second season. Everything just goes how there's some magic attack with the result of Kenshin Himura's weakness relentlessly happens when he seeks out his teacher, Seijiro Hiko, in order to complete the swordsman training where he left behind long ago. And these types of results for the major characters, how it has been developed, being a mid-90s and early 2000s anime, shown in its types of series of battles where every character are shouting the names of the moves when they perform the techniques of how the story how it goes by. Other than Makoto Shishio, along with his 10 minions, and Ayoshi Ishinomori, and the dynamic characters, including we got other characters such as Misao, and her caretakers, who are also part of the Oni Waban group, also introduced in the second season as well. Yeah, Makoto Shishio is everyone's favorite villains because he may be the badass villain, though, of the story. How it reflects of how the develops of how the character is given any types of backstory there's some minor characters are relevant on every backstory, continuously intervenes of how to communicate of how the spectacular duels with Kenshin, especially the library conflict duel between Aoshi Shinomori and Kenshin on their backgrounds and the library scene is how this particular goes. From how this is basically how it's given in the backstory when he served as a mentor. There's Sanosuke's earlier part in this anime goes, especially the fights where a teacher and the students square off in the battle and their lives, dreams for its own sake of how this goes on. And it's types of backstory when there wasn't allowed as well. And also, you all also got the origins of how Shishio was after he was being set on fire, including a young boy who is part of the Shishio's henchmen, and every part of the antagonists. All of them were, if they're not lucky enough to be detailed, there's many cooks in the kitchen as how many of those characters are introduced to be in this particular series. Every tensions of the weaker allies, when Kenshin's companions have been terming of developments, exceptions of Sanosuke in the second season, very famous of how its villains could have been always be included as how there's the anti-hero. You got Hajime Saito, which I mentioned earlier before as well. Yeah, especially. Yeah, that scene in that episode, The Devil of Vengeance, Makoto Shishio's plot. Saito is basically a historical character and being introduced in the series, who is the third unit of the Shinsengumi, including the female fan base. Unfortunately, Saito lived late enough in the Japanese history until his picture taken, which is nothing almost to expect. He's basically your typical character who is the one-dimensional anti-hero when he served as the moral middle ground, encouraging Kenshin Himura which he could kill if he would have realistically needed to. But then again, this would have gotten how the values of how this goes. But Kenshin vows never to kill after regretting the atrocities of his past whereabouts. I mean, if you ever read the original manga, though, then you would have been compelled to have how you can know the difference if you ever want to pick something as well. Every deaths of the character remains, but how this is a lot more different than the other. Quite a frankly interesting thing as well, isn't it? Kenshin was suffering from any splits of personality disorders, but he's basically a kind-hearted samurai who's saving everyone's life. But on the other hand, his other personality is ruthless and would just kill the threats as well, especially that led to the viewers like he's some blood junkie addicted to killing. But there's one person regarding of how evil other antagonists are, of how this inversible action would send him into the depths of the murder. I mean, the story basically makes it feel of how there's types of personality within his body, especially good and one that is absolutely evil. After all, any types of personality is how it's more different than the other. Of how control on this, the second season comes by of how they should have ended season second as well, but that wasn't long until the non-canon third season on there, which is almost a little mediocre at its point. Which the third season is a little non-canon filler, which it basically ignores everything that has to do with the manga, which basically introducing magic. Especially they use one-dimensional villains. I'm not gonna lie, basically, though. The third season has its moments, though, especially when Misao and her caretakers appeared later on in episode 89 in that one, especially, of how it was great to see them after seeing them in the second season, which I thought episode 89 was a pretty good episode on there. This has struggled in mine as well, and also there's some religious tones going on, like the Christianity parts that you find in that episode. In this, if you're watching the third season on there, I never knew that back then there was Buddhism in Japan back in the days, but that wasn't long until the modern century of Japan, of how like a long history of how it's more different. Of every splitting images on samurai characters like Jin and Mugen from Samurai Champloo, but that's very different. But to be honest though, Rurouni Kenshin, on the other hand, is your typical late 90s, early 2000s anime, from the works of the fact of how this was simply how if you're comparing the anime to the original manga, it has its panel per panel. The accurate was basically 100% on every adaptation and its own part, if it's canon or non-canon, or filler or non-filler, and it's depending on of how the story is basically wanted to focus on. The third season always took place, but the manga contained most of the character developments for all in this particular, for the protagonists, of how the third season existed as a filler and non-canon season, unlike the first two previous two seasons, which ironically the first two seasons, well, the first season is like a beginner one with its comedic one, but the second season is more darker and more serious as well. Especially the battle between Kenshin and Himura fighting with Shishio, which I thought it was pretty good. As how after 20 years of how the creators of the show preferred if they made money of any quality, if they would have ever lasted. If there's only way to watch it or to binge watch on something, especially of how you're on the par if you ever watch the original anime or if you read the original manga in general. I must say, there's basically of how you would expect as how I'm learning the fact as well. Yeah. Come to think of it, because I have to revisit this anime though, well, I'm glad basically of how the art stuff. So, the story on Rurouni Kenshin, it's basically very good though. I mean, there's some serious parts in the story, especially in how in the second season, which is very good and all. And also the battles, like every opponent's Kenshin has fought, when he has fought Shishio, which I thought it was pretty badass, because that's how, and also the sword duel in the library between Kenshin Himura and I believe Aoshi Shinomori, which I thought it was pretty going from nowhere, especially of how the sword duel in a library and throwing books while doing the sword fighting and all, especially when Misao wanted Aoshi Shinomori to be with the Oniwaban group as well, but how the darkness feel inside of how his person, reflecting on Aoshi Shinomori's personality, especially in the second season of this particular anime. If there's any things of how, as of the anime of today, because we all know the battles, the characters are very basically newer. There's mostly on these characters like minor characters, like especially like you see from the second season of Rurouni Kenshin, like Misao and her caretakers, who are also part of the Oniwaban group. Yeah, I think they only appeared in episode 89 as well. Well, you may see them as well in, I believe, yeah, and also I think, though, that I don't think that Hajime Saito never appeared in Season 3, but the intro in the third season of Rurouni Kenshin, it just shows the clip of Hajime Saito appears in the intro, but never appeared in every episode in the third season, which is kind of strange, and it's very... just didn't even attempt to hide the fact that this wasn't the same season where it doesn't feature Hajime Saito from the second season. And you're telling me that this basically how it's a lot more different than the first two previous seasons of this particular anime? Well, you guessed it as well, because I'm talking about the characters. That's the thing as well. Yeah, and also the music is very memorable. It's very gives it a little feel of the atmospheric of how this takes place in 1878 Meiji Restoration, which is after the Tokugawa era, which is the Japan's era of the violence and isolation, back in like the 1860s as well. But the restoration in the late 1870s to the 1800s, as well as the 1880s, as how the story progresses on how the music sets the tone, especially like when the music gets all a little rowdy, and especially when Kenshin has to defeat the opponents with his the Sakaboto, which is basically his reverse blade sword. When his personality mood, when something happened around his past doings that surrounded inside his personality. Yeah, the music was very memorable, and there is also moments, especially the romance between when Kaoru wanted Kenshin to be with her as well. Especially the songs on there. The voice options in there, especially for the sound, is good, though. If you're watching the English dub on here, for typical night on there, but I highly recommend you watching the anime in its original Japanese with English subtitles. If you've ever been a fan of old anime from the late 90s and early 2000s, in its own certain way, that's how there's more I would like to see more as well, if it's your cup of tea. And also for the final score for the anime Rurouni Kenshin, I'm going to give it a 9.10. Yep, that's right. If you want to binge watch on something like Rurouni Kenshin, get it. I highly recommend you to watch it. You can watch it on Crunchyroll, or if you have it on DVD, because I highly recommend you to watch this anime, because there's some comedic on there, but there's some action, dark, serious sword fights and all, and the battles between Kenshin and his opponents, who are the threats in that one as well. Especially for everyone should see Rurouni Kenshin as well, basically. If you want to watch something good for a change as well. And that's all that I got as to the thing as well. And also, if you'll ever love for this recommended, for this anime recommendation here on Anime Retrospect here, if you ever loved watching anime that has some samurais in it, Rurouni Kenshin is the perfect one to watch. I know if you're ever going to start, it's either you watch the series or you're going to start with the Rurouni Kenshin OVAs, such as Rurouni Kenshin Trust and Betrayal, or Samurai X Reflection. Although the movie takes place, which I think is during the restoration, which is the revolution of the government, the Meiji government as well. And also, there is also the remake, which is a retelling on the episodes from the second season of Rurouni Kenshin, which is New Kyoto Arc also, from what I understand particularly as well. So, that's going to be it for my revisiting Rurouni Kenshin for today here on Anime Retrospect. Thank you for watching. Hope subscribe for content. My anime plan link in the description down below. You share this video on your Twitter, Facebook, if you have Twitter, Facebook account, and all social media. Let me know in the comments section below. What do you think of Rurouni Kenshin? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Rurouni K95. Feel free to join my channel, especially if you're new to my channel as a newcomer. Smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified as well. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Feel free to join if you're a newcomer to my channel. And keep it otaku for this revisiting Rurouni Kenshin, because I had to revisit something from the past as well. Maybe I should get the ball rolling for what I cover for the future, revisiting on Rurouni Kenshin anime for the most part on Anime Retrospect. Like, where can I cover? Like, should I revisit the Samurai X the motion picture, or Samurai X Reflection, or Rurouni Kenshin New Kyoto Arc, or maybe even Trust and Betrayal, because that'll be for the most part in the future. But we can only imagine. This is Rurouni K95 saying thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you liked it. I hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video on Anime Retrospect. Hope you have a great day. And until then, because I have another anime to look forward to revisit from the past also as well. And also, happy anniversary to this anime that came out on this day. Till next time.